Good morning. Thanks for Clay and the Balchem people for inviting me. And hopefully at the end of the symposia, you'll go home with 2 or 3 ideas to think about to put in operation with the herds that you work with. And Clay has always given me the easy topics. And so obviously you can see that the topic here is how low can we go? And obviously you're looking for the one number, so we'll see what happens as we go through. Why do we want to feed lower protein rations anyhow? Well, I think number one, we can improve profitability of the dairy farm. In most cases, it lowers feed costs. There could be cases where that's not true, but generally it does. That gives us an opportunity then to increase income over feed cost. It also improves the efficiency of nitrogen used by the cow. That means there's less nitrogen in the manure, and there's less in the manure, we can put more tons of manure per acre for herds that have nutrient management plans. And the last one is, there's less ammonia going into the atmosphere, which at some point, EPA is going to come down on farms and put some limits on ammonia emissions. But I think the driver at the farm level is number one. If we can help improve profitability, then we get the attention and the interest. So what are the goals of protein nutrition? I borrowed this from Dr. Gabby Varga at Penn State. Number one, we want to give adequate amounts of degradable protein to optimize rumen efficiency. And obviously you have to balance that with the carbohydrates to grow the bugs. And secondly, we want to do this, get the animal productivity with a minimum amount of dietary protein. The more we make in the bugs, the less we need in the feed bunk. And so the combination of those is what we're after. So how low can we go? Well, a few years ago at dairy science meetings, I can't remember the exact year, there was a poster from Japan. And it basically said that they had some studies in Japan with dry forage diets, 27% forage, a lot of hay. Rations were 14-15% protein. They were getting 90-95 pounds of milk. And a lot of us said, hey, that's really interesting. So what can we do, or what do we see as we go back to our situations in the Northeast or throughout the U.S.? Mike Van Amberg, who's going to be on later, has done a number of trials. And we've had rations 13.5 to 14.5% protein that'll support 85, 95, maybe 100 pounds of milk. Dr. Alec Christoph at Penn State has done a number of trials between 14 and 15% protein, and again, they can support 85, 95 pounds of milk. So that's about as much of the research data as we're going to show at this point. A lot of it's saying if we get the thing right, we can get relatively lower than we previously thought. A few years ago in California, there was a survey done of some of the high producing herds in California. And this chart, basically on the left is 15% protein, on the right's 20. On the other axis is milk production. And the interesting thing is there's a herd down at a little over 15% at 87 pounds of milk. There's a herd at 19.5 at 87 pounds of milk. And you can see that there's not a direct correlation, sort of a scatter. So again, it says, that's what's out there. And Jim Ferguson at Penn State, as part of the Chesapeake Bay Project a number of years ago, looked at 60 herds and put out some lactation curves. And I don't think the pointer, no, that works a little bit. Less than 16% is the light blue line. This is greater than 18%, and those are the in-betweens. You can basically see that the herds less than 16, they weren't terribly different. Weren't terribly different than herds greater than 18. And again, that's, maybe 10, 15 herds in each of those lines. So it gives some ideas that maybe there's opportunities here that we haven't thought about in the past. A number of years ago, we did a feed trial in Western New York to really validate one of the versions of the Cornell Model, actually. So we used 2 herds with 2 different nutritionists. The nutritionists selected the herds as those they thought had opportunities to lower protein and would be willing to cooperate. The rations were the high group, so basically we took over the high group in these 2 herds for about 8 months. But the important thing, we kept the feed people involved, and they were the gatekeeper. So if we readjusted the ration before it was ever fed to the herd, the nutritionist at that herd had to give approval. So we kept them in the loop. They had to be part of the cooperation. So if we look at ration protein, we were able to drop both of these herds about a point of protein in simple terms. Maybe not as low as you'd like to go, but in those herds at that time, without impacting milk and some other management things, we felt we went about as far as we could go in the initial time. About a point of protein. If you look at metabolizable protein, what happened? Well, in the one herd, we dropped it. They were feeding MP much higher than the fat and starch would support, and they were at high starch, high fat, so you couldn't really move those up any. So we just brought down the excess. In the other herd, we actually increased MP a little bit. So again, you can see a crossover here. CP went down in both herds, MP operated differently. And keep that in mind as we go through the rest of the presentation. If you look at nitrogen intake, it dropped about 60 grams here and about 30 grams there between the initial rations and the final. So about 60 grams per day, 30 grams. If you look at total manure excretion grams per day, it dropped 60 grams and 30 grams. Where's all the excess nitrogen going in? Went in the front, out the back, nothing happened in between. Okay? MUNs dropped about 2 units in these herds. But probably the important one is this one. This is the income over purchased and total feed cost. So again, the red is the initial total feed cost. The green is the final total feed cost. The yellow is the initial purchase feed cost. This blue is the final purchase feed cost. Income over feed cost, whether you look at total or purchased, improved in both herds. This herd was about 25 to 30 cents. This herd was about 80 or 90 cents. So again, we were able to lower the protein, decrease excretion to the environment, improve efficiency of use, and improve profitability of the dairy farm. Recently, I got involved with a field trial in Delaware County, New York. They had a contract. About halfway through, their planner left, so I got to go in and finish it up. The 8 herds that we used, these are the upper Susquehanna watershed, which feeds into the Chesapeake Bay. And if you're in the east, you know there's a lot of pressure on agriculture from the Chesapeake Bay. This trial was conducted over 3 years, and the thing about this one, the rations were formulated by the feed industry professional working with the farm. We did not formulate the rations. We did interact with the farm and the feed industry professional to assist in implementing precision feed management plans and talk about ration adjustments. But all the rations were formulated and adjusted by the feed industry professional. I think when we do field research, it's important to have that nutritionist as part of the team and him actively involved if we're going to have progress. What did we see? These herds ranged all the way from 50 pounds of milk to almost 100. But the average went up. You can say it went up. I say milk production didn't change very much. 69 to 72 is not a big deal. It didn't change a whole lot. We did lower ration protein on average 17.5 to 15.8. Some herds, small amounts of drop. Some herds, bigger drops. Manure nitrogen went down a little over 50 grams per cow per day, which again, if you take that times number of cows, days, and years, adds up to be quite a few pounds less to go out into the field. If we look at change in income over feed cost, if you look at the total feed cost, it was a little over $100 per cow. It went up. If you look at over purchase feed, it was getting close to $140 per cow. So again, at the field level on actual farms, we were able to alter protein feeding, decrease excretion of the environment, and improve profitability of the dairy farm. So another piece of the puzzle is I said, okay, if we're going to do this talk today, let's see what the high producing herds are doing. So we had a number of herds we already had available from previous work Cornell would interacting with farms that we had in our data bank. We also sent a request out to feed industry professionals. Many of the people in the room probably got a request. We wanted rations for herds greater than 95 pounds of milk per day. So we sort of set a cutoff. I've got a bigger data set we're going to talk about in a regular conference. We ended up with 79 rations. So we have 79 of these. And then out of that 79, I just took a subset and said, let's look at all the ones less than 16%. So we're looking at the subset today. The average of this group was 105 pounds of milk per day. So that's what we're going to look at to see what these herds are doing. Okay? So the characteristics of these, and obviously we have the averages in here. And you look down through there, 51 forage, 30 NDF, 4 sugar, 28 starch, 5 fat. You know, they're not different than a lot of the herds that you see. But the important thing, the more important one, is this on the right, the ranges. 46, 58. And down here you get 23 to 34. That's the important part, is the ranges. Some of these herds are doing these things a lot differently, but still ending up with similar results. What about protein amino acids in these herds? Well, the average protein of those rations is 15.5, but the range 13.4 to 16.2. 13.4 at 100 pounds of milk. Now, I should point out how we got the milk, okay? The milk we're using is the lowest of the ME, MP predicted milk from the CNCPS model. We did not use the input milk from the rations because, number one, some people put in actual milk, some put target milks. And so they don't have a common value on the input ration. So we said we're going to use the lowest predicted of the ME or MP milk with the Cornell model. You can disagree with that approach, but that's how we did it. That's how we're getting our numbers, okay? If you look at metabolizable protein, a little over 3,000 grams, and again, see the range. The amount of MP from bacteria, 51. One herd's up there, almost 58% of the MP is from bacteria. We want to make that rumen work. The cheapest way to make my metabolizable protein is get the rumen operating correctly and use carbohydrates to produce that metabolizable protein. Metabolizable protein percent required, 106, a little bit of range, 98 to 117. So again, does this herd have opportunities to lower it even more? Lysine, 6.6, that's a little bit lower than most of us would like to see as percent of MP. But again, the range, 6.2 to almost 7. In methionine, 2.3. That's bumping into the bottom end of the range that most people like to see for methionine as percentage of the metabolizable protein. But again, you can see there's quite a range on there. Some of these herds really aren't doing very well in terms of methionine and so on. So what about the amino acids in these herds? Well, 8 herds had greater than 6.8% lysine as percent of MP. So if we use that cutoff of 6.8, which is what number of people are using, 8 of the herds, 8 out of 15 met that. So about half of them. On methionine, 11 herds were greater than 2.3, 2 herds were greater than 2.6. So depending which cut you use, they either were getting close in methionine or they weren't doing very well at all. Depends which of those cut points you like to use in terms of methionine. There's also some herds, if we look at this, only 4 herds were using an added lysine source, like a protected. They're getting lysine from some of the other feeds in the ration, but in terms of, say, a protected lysine product, only 4 were using that. 14 used some form of methionine, so there's 1 herd out there out of the 15 that didn't use any protected methionine. And only 3 herds used both lysine and methionine in combination. So again, do we have opportunities in these herds to make even more? So the opportunities, I think in many of these herds, there's potential to lower protein even a little bit more if we better do a job with the MP and the amino acid balance, potentially. The key area in these herds then would be looking at amino acid balance, and again, how much lower we can go, we're not sure, but there's potential to go lower. So at this point, we got a group of cows, and the cows are saying, well, given all that data, we should be feeding low-protein rations. But a lot of people aren't. So the question is, why hasn't this been implemented at the farm level? So a few years ago, we did a survey of the feed industry, and some of the people in the room here probably were involved in it. They may not remember it because it was a number of years ago. And the question really was, why aren't you using lower protein rations on the farms you work with? What did you tell me? You said you're concerned about the consistency and quality of daily farm feed mixing and feed management. You're concerned about daily variations in dry matter forages and quality. Whether you have component system versus TMR, don't have good forage dry matters to adjust rations, herd grouping and ration strategy. Sometimes if you have a one group system, are you going to put amino acids in for everybody or not? And so that can have an impact. A lot of these forages have 60-70% soluble protein, which makes it tough. Accuracy of forage analysis, combination of sampling and analysis, aren't using MUNs as a monitoring tool. Some people wonder if our formulation programs are accurate enough to do these predictions and calculations. I think it comes back to how good are the inputs. If the inputs are excellent, I think the programs don't do too bad. And does it work in other herds? But I think those are the things that you as feed industry people said are the reasons that were holding you back. In that first one, the consistency, day-to-day feeding management, I think is a big piece of the puzzle. So what are the challenges if we're going to start going out on herds and try to lower this protein? Well, every time you change things on a farm, there's always risks, aren't there? There's considerations and risks when we alter rations and nutrition programs, whether it's fiber, forage feeding, protein, amino acids, whatever. The other one that you have to think about and you work with every day is how large of a safety factor do you need on this herd versus the next herd? Because you know that there's differences, and the safety factor is going to be different in those herds for a lot of reasons. A lot of it comes back to that consistency and variability. And then how low can you push this without impacting milk? Those are the questions that you have to face as you start thinking about using this in herds. So we're going to sort of walk through sort of a few steps that you could think about, and then at the end we're going to try to answer Clay's question. First thing I think we have to do if we're going to herd to do some of this, make sure you got the good information on rations, forages, feeding management, and so on, and make sure you use a model that predicts metabolizable protein. You have to use MP as part of this process. Once you have that initial information, then you can sit down and say, okay, where are we? What are the opportunities? And then you have to match that with the goals, objectives, and risk tolerance of the producer. Some producers want to take no risk. Other ones are willing to take some. Where does that mesh into this system? Okay? The initial evaluation, we have to be able to look at daily feeding management practices so we can assess consistency. A herd that's very inconsistent day to day, you may not want to push too hard on the lower end of some of these things without risk of messing up milk, right? So can we look at milk per cow and dry matter intake per day in the herd, on forage dry matters, MUNs, and maybe some other tools that you use. But if we don't have this good baseline data to show that there's some consistency day to day, then we got to be careful that we don't push too hard, because if we do push hard, we know where milk is going to go. At the end of these first 4 steps, we should be able to say, is this herd a candidate to potentially look at lowering protein in the rations? And I think you could use this same format for looking at levels of forage feeding, starch levels, fat levels, all kinds of things. So once we say, okay, the herd's candidate, then again, get current samples, analyze for model inputs, run the model on an MP basis, get the results, and then sit down and talk with the producer and yourself as feed industry and say, here's what it looks like, this is what we think it might be able to go this way by this amount, and make sure everybody's on board. If you don't get that buy-in, it's not going to work. Then define how you going to monitor whether it worked or not. What tool are you going to use? So you, in a week, a month, whatever, you can say, did we make the right decision? Is it moving the right way? Set those tools up. Make the changes small, monitor, evaluate, repeat. You do that all the time, hopefully. Never make a big change. And then think about when you get through to this point, this is where you start bringing in, where do amino acids fit into this? Until we get the above things under control, probably shouldn't spend a lot of time on amino acids. But when you get to this point, the amino acids come in to be a very key player in this process. And then keep that dialogue going with the producer regarding how things are going. So what are the key points to make this thing work? Well, I say mindset. Does the producer believe, and do you believe, that lower protein rations will work? If both people don't believe it will work, guess what? It won't work. We've all been there, right? Low day-to-day variation in feeds and feeding management, good data on dry matter intake, optimized ration to grow bugs in the rumen, select our rumen undegradable protein sources with low variability and high consistency of quality, consider amino acids in the formulation, monitor the milk urea nitrogens. Now, we still have that one. So how low can you go? Well, here's what I'm going to answer best as I can with Clay's question. First of all, what is your metric that you're going to use? If you're going to use MP, balance as close to 100% requirement as you're comfortable with. A few people say you might be able to go a little bit under that, but let's just say, how close can we get to the requirement? And that's where you have to bring in those on-farm factors of consistency, variability. You know, can you get by with 102 and feel good, or do you need 110 to be safe? That's the decision you have to make based on the farm data. After you get the MP balance, then you can check the crude protein to see if there's opportunities to lower it at all. But I think MP is the way to go. Now let's look at this one. These are 5 herds out of this 15 herd data set. These are actual herds. They're running, as you can see, 100 plus pounds of milk. On the left, we've got the MP grams per day. Not really very different. They're all pretty darn close, I would say, within 10 grams. Look at the difference in CP, 13.9 to 18.3. That's why I think we go with MP and then take a look over here. Because obviously, at least a couple of these herds, we should be able to lower that to some extent. So that's why I think it's important to look at the MP. Okay? Yes? Bacterial MP? Well, in the average, if you take the average of the 15, it was about 51% of this would have been from bacteria. So if you just cut these all in half, you're still going to get about the same thing, that they're all going to be fairly close over here. They're going to be quite different over here. Now, if you have different, you know, if you get more MP or less out of the bacteria, but if you use the averages, it's going to show a similar range of CP at similar level of microbial protein per day, if you use that 51. Not necessarily, and I'd have to go back and look at these herds to answer that specifically, but actually some of the Some of the better herds are the ones that get the higher MP. So we'll see. Yeah. Good question, though. If your metric is crude protein, if some people still want to look at crude protein, then I think most herds we ought to be able to get close to 16. A lot of herds we can get down to 15 to 16 and get 95 plus pounds of milk. There's some herds you could go all the way to 14, 15% CP and make it work to get that 95 plus pounds of milk. But my caveat, before you make any adjustments to lower ration crude protein, you've got to run rations with a model that calculates MP. Low crude protein rations only work if MP is adequate. If MP is not adequate and you lower protein, you might be going down the milk production decrease pathway. So again, it all comes back, I think, to the MP. If MP is adequate, you can go down to these lower levels, 14 or 15, and get that 95 to 100 plus pounds of milk. But don't lower protein without looking at MP to make sure it's adequate. So to wrap this up real quick, I think research and commercial farm data does indicate we have the opportunity to lower protein in many herds without lowering milk if MP is met. A lot of the herds out here, we can probably take a half a point to a point of protein off. They wouldn't even know it in terms of milk for the cows. This usually improves profits, lowers excretion in the environment. Down here, this is really the key to make the thing work. Consistent management day to day, low variability is the key, and then the meeting adequate MP. Those are the two that really drive how low you feel comfortable going in these herds and with that protein. Our dairymen still look at crude protein. They're not that familiar with MP. So I think what we do is we formulate all the rations on MP, make sure they're adequate, and then we show them that, and then we talk about CP because they're comfortable with that. I think MP is what we have to do. So at this point, we're going to stop and see if we've got any other questions. Thanks for your attention.